Chapter 1. She's sitting across from you, scrolling her phone, half listening, nodding at the right moments, and you can feel it even if you don't have the words for it yet. You're talking, explaining, laying out who you are, what you bring, how you move, why you matter. You can hear yourself doing it, selling, framing, clarifying. And somewhere in your chest, there's this quiet awareness that none of it is landing the way you want it to. Not because you're wrong, not because you're lying, but because explanation isn't the language that actually shifts behavior. You've probably been here before. You try to communicate more clearly, thinking that clarity is the missing piece. You adjust your tone, pick better words, wait for the right moment. You tell yourself that if she really understood your value, things would change. But understanding isn't the same as feeling pressure. And without pressure, dynamics don't move. They just repeat. That's the uncomfortable truth most men run into late instead of early. What's happening in moments like this isn't disrespect in the loud sense. It's not yelling or obvious defiance. It's something quieter. It's casual disregard. It's comfort without urgency. And comfort without urgency is where leverage goes to die. You don't lose ground because you did something wrong. You lose it because there's no reason for anything to change. From her perspective, everything is stable, predictable, safe. You're there. You're invested. You're not going anywhere. That certainty shapes behavior more than any speech ever could. Most men hate admitting this because it sounds harsh, but attraction doesn't maintain itself on reassurance. It maintains itself on awareness of replacement, not threat, not intimidation, awareness, the understanding that attention isn't guaranteed and effort isn't optional. When that awareness disappears, people relax into entitlement without even realizing it. They don't wake up planning to take you for granted. They just slowly stop feeling the need to impress you. You can see this dynamic clearly if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Think about how people behave when they know they're the only option versus when they know there's competition. The posture changes, the tone changes, the attention sharpens. Suddenly there's consideration. Suddenly things you asked for before aren't forgotten anymore. That shift isn't moral, it's psychological. And pretending otherwise just keeps men stuck in loops of frustration. A lot of men try to counter this by doubling down on self-description. They list accomplishments, they highlight effort, they remind her of what they provide. That approach feels logical, but it misunderstands how value is perceived. Value isn't proven through explanation, it's inferred through demand. When other people want access to you, your value stops being theoretical. It becomes observable, and observable value doesn't need defending. This is where things get uncomfortable for men who want fairness instead of reality. You want your words to matter because you mean them. You want loyalty to be inspired by connection, not comparison. That desire is understandable. But desire doesn't change how human behavior works. People respond to environments, not intentions. And the environment you create either encourages respect or erodes it quietly over time. There's a subtle difference between being confident and being chosen repeatedly. Confidence is internal. Being chosen is external. When a woman knows you can be chosen elsewhere, her behavior calibrates whether she wants it to or not. That calibration doesn't require you to say anything. It doesn't require posturing. It just exists. And existence is louder than argument. Most men get stuck because they think having options automatically makes them disloyal or dishonest. That's not true. Options don't mean acting on everything. They mean not being dependent on one person's approval to feel grounded. When your sense of self isn't tied to one woman's validation, your energy changes. You're calmer, less reactive, less eager to convince. That calm alone shifts dynamics before anyone else enters the picture. You don't need to threaten anyone with replacement. That's insecurity wearing aggression. What actually changes things is knowing you don't have to threaten at all. When you're capable of attracting other women, it shows in how you move. You're not pleading, you're not chasing, you're not explaining yourself to death. You're choosing where to invest your time. That choice is felt immediately, even if it's never spoken aloud. There's one moment most men remember once they see this clearly. It's the moment a woman they've been with suddenly starts acting different when she becomes aware that someone else sees their value. Maybe it's another woman showing interest. Maybe it's social proof in a public setting. Whatever the trigger, the shift is immediate. More attentiveness, more softness, more effort. And that moment is confusing if you're still believing behavior is driven by words alone. That confusion turns into clarity once you accept a hard truth. Behavior responds to leverage, not lectures. You can be the most articulate man in the room and still be ignored if there's no perceived cost to ignoring you. Cost doesn't have to be punitive. It can simply be opportunity loss, the possibility that access to you isn't guaranteed. That possibility reintroduces respect into the equation. Some men hear this and assume it means they have to live a chaotic life, juggling people, creating jealousy, manufacturing drama. That's not what this is about. Drama is the opposite of leverage. Drama signals instability. What actually creates leverage is optionality combined with discipline. You could engage elsewhere, but you don't need to prove it. You just know it's there. That internal security is what others respond to, not theatrics. If you're listening to this and feeling resistance, that's normal. Resistance usually shows up right before a belief cracks. Ask yourself honestly where talking has gotten you. How many conversations you've had that changed nothing. How often you've explained the same expectation only to watch it be ignored again. That repetition isn't bad luck. It's feedback. And feedback is only painful when you refuse to interpret it. This isn't about controlling anyone. Control's fragile. It requires constant enforcement. What actually works is self-selection. People either rise to the environment you represent or they don't. You don't force that process. You observe it. You adjust accordingly. That's power without noise. That's leadership without announcement. If this chapter's already reframing how you've experienced past situations, sit with that. Don't rush to conclusions. Let the pattern settle. If this resonates, hit like on the video, not as agreement with everything said, but as acknowledgement that you've seen this dynamic play out in real life. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why competition doesn't make relationships weaker when handled correctly, and how the presence of options actually stabilizes behavior instead of destroying trust. Chapter 2. Competition doesn't destabilize relationships the way people pretend it does. What destabilizes relationships is complacency disguised as comfort. When someone believes access is permanent, effort quietly fades. Not because they're malicious, but because human beings respond to incentives whether they admit it or not. Stability without standards turns into entitlement over time, and entitlement corrodes respect faster than conflict ever could. Most men have been taught that exclusivity alone should be enough to inspire loyalty and effort. That belief sounds noble, but it ignores how attraction actually behaves. Attraction sharpens when it's maintained, not when it's assumed. When someone knows they're chosen every day by default, without evaluation, without alternatives, without consequence, their behavior relaxes in ways that don't serve the relationship. Again, not consciously. It just happens. Familiarity dulls urgency unless something counterbalances it. This is where people misunderstand competition. They think it means chaos, jealousy, manipulation. That's the insecure version of it. Real competition is quiet. It's the background awareness that you're not the only option in the world. That awareness doesn't need to be weaponized. It just needs to exist. When it exists, people don't have to be told to show up. They choose to. And choice is always more powerful than obligation. You've seen this dynamic everywhere, not just in relationships. Jobs treat employees differently when they know those employees have other opportunities. Friend groups behave differently when someone's presence isn't guaranteed. Markets move based on scarcity, not sentiment. Pretending romantic dynamics operate under a different set of rules doesn't make it true. It just leaves men unprepared for reality. A lot of men resist this idea because they confuse competition with disloyalty. They think acknowledging options means betraying commitment. That's backwards. Commitment chosen freely is stronger than commitment chosen out of fear. When someone stays because they want to, not because they have nowhere else to go, the bond is cleaner. There's less resentment, less power struggle, less quiet contempt. That's what people miss when they moralize the conversation instead of observing it. When a woman knows you have options, she doesn't suddenly become insecure if she respects you. She becomes more intentional, more attentive, more present, not because she's afraid of losing you, but because she understands your value isn't dependent on her mood. That understanding creates balance. Without it, the dynamic tilts, and once it tilts, it's hard to correct with words alone. Men often try to create this effect artificially by talking about their value, their accomplishments, their potential. That approach rarely works because it asks for belief instead of demonstrating reality. Belief is optional. Reality isn't. When other people respond to you positively without you prompting it, the message is delivered without a single sentence, and that message lands deeper than any explanation ever could. There's also an internal shift that happens when you know you have options. You stop overreacting. You stop chasing validation. You stop trying to win every disagreement. You don't feel threatened by distance or silence. That emotional steadiness changes how people interact with you. They sense that you're not operating from need. And needlessness is magnetic in a way words can't replicate. This doesn't mean you flaunt interest from others. That's insecurity trying to look like confidence. Real leverage doesn't need display. It shows up in subtle ways, in how relaxed you are, in how you're willing to walk away from disrespect, in how you don't negotiate your standards. Those behaviors signal abundance far more clearly than name-dropping or posturing ever will. A lot of men don't realize how much they talk themselves out of leverage. They reassure too quickly. They over-explain. They try to smooth every moment of tension immediately. In doing so, they remove all pressure from the environment. Pressure isn't cruelty, it's feedback. Without it, behavior stagnates. With it, people adjust naturally without feeling forced. Think about moments where someone suddenly changed their behavior without you saying anything new. That didn't happen because you finally found the right words. It happened because something in the environment shifted. Maybe your availability changed. Maybe your attention moved. Maybe your priorities became clearer. Whatever it wasn't verbal. It was contextual. And context always outweighs conversation. Men who understand this stop arguing about respect. They don't demand it. They structure their lives in ways that require it. They invest time where it's reciprocated. They disengage where it isn't. They don't threaten departure. They're simply prepared for it. That preparedness is what changes how people treat you, not the act of leaving itself. This is also where trust comes into the picture in a more honest way. Trust isn't built on pretending temptation doesn't exist. It's built on knowing temptation exists and choosing alignment anyway. When someone knows you could leave but you stay, that choice carries weight. When someone knows you can't leave, staying means nothing. That's the difference most people never articulate. If you're hearing this and thinking it sounds cold, ask yourself whether the alternative has worked. Has endless explanation produced the respect you wanted? Has reassurance prevented complacency? Has ignoring reality created the relationship dynamic you hoped for? If not, maybe it's time to stop judging the mechanism and start understanding it. This chapter isn't about encouraging chaos, it's about restoring balance. Balance doesn't come from control, it comes from optionality combined with self-respect. When those two things coexist, relationships stabilize because effort becomes voluntary again. And voluntary effort is always higher quality than effort extracted through obligation. If this perspective is challenging something you've believed for a long time, that's a good sign. Growth usually starts with friction. If this chapter helped you see why behavior shifts when options exist, take a moment and share it with someone who keeps trying to talk their way into being valued. In the next chapter, we'll look at why men are taught to suppress this understanding, how guilt gets weaponized against them, and how to hold leverage without becoming cynical or detached. Chapter 3. There's a reason this understanding gets framed as wrong, immoral, or insecure the moment men start articulating it. It threatens a narrative that benefits people who gain from men staying predictable, available, and easily guilted into overinvestment. When leverage gets mentioned, it's immediately painted as manipulation, as if the only acceptable dynamic is one where a man explains himself endlessly and hopes that good intentions eventually get rewarded. That framing isn't accidental. It keeps men disarmed. From a young age, men are taught that wanting options makes them selfish, that acknowledging attraction elsewhere makes them untrustworthy, that boundaries are somehow cruelty. So when they feel leverage slipping, they don't adjust behavior. They adjust morality. They tell themselves they're being noble, patient, understanding, and slowly that nobility turns into self-erasure. They're still present, still loyal, still investing, but they're no longer respected in the way they expected. Then they're confused when resentment shows up on both sides. Guilt is the mechanism that keeps this cycle going. Not overt guilt, but subtle guilt. The kind that whispers you're wrong for wanting to be valued without explanation. Wrong for expecting effort without begging. Wrong for noticing how behavior shifts when alternatives exist. That guilt convinces men to suppress what they're observing in real time. They talk themselves out of their own pattern recognition because acknowledging it feels socially forbidden. And when you ignore patterns long enough, you start doubting your perception entirely. This is why so many men feel crazy in relationships that aren't openly abusive. Nothing extreme is happening, but something feels off. They can't point to one catastrophic event. It's just a slow erosion of enthusiasm, of attentiveness, of cooperation. When they try to address it directly, they're told they're insecure, controlling, or overthinking. That response doesn't fix the issue. It shuts the conversation down. And once the conversation is shut down, behavior continues unchecked. The irony is that holding leverage doesn't require saying any of this out loud. You don't need to argue theory. You don't need to defend philosophy. You don't need to convince anyone that options matter. You simply need to live in a way where your presence is valuable and not guaranteed. That's it. Everything else is noise layered on top of that simple reality. A man who has leverage doesn't panic when things feel slightly off. He doesn't scramble to correct every shift in mood. He observes. He gives space. He lets patterns reveal themselves fully instead of interrupting them with reassurance. That patience isn't passive. It's diagnostic. It allows him to see whether effort returns on its own or only when prompted. That information is priceless, and it can't be obtained through conversation alone. One of the biggest lies men are told is that wanting to be wanted makes them weak. In reality, wanting to be wanted is honest. What weakens men is pretending indifference while secretly craving validation. That split creates desperation masked as stoicism. True leverage comes from alignment between internal reality and external behavior. You're not pretending you don't care. You care, but you're not dependent. That distinction changes everything. When guilt loses its grip, something else happens. Men stop over-explaining their standards. They don't justify why something matters to them. They state it once, calmly, and then watch. If behavior aligns, they continue investing. If it doesn't, they pull back without theatrics. That response confuses people who are used to endless negotiation. But confusion isn't cruelty. It's simply unfamiliar territory for those who expect infinite tolerance. This is where cynicism often gets mistaken for clarity. Men who first encounter this understanding sometimes swing too far and become cold. They treat relationships like games. They withhold affection intentionally. That's not leverage. That's fear dressed up as control. Leverage doesn't require emotional starvation. It requires emotional independence. You can be warm, present, and engaged while still being willing to walk away from disrespect. That balance is rare because it requires self-trust, not tactics. A man who trusts himself doesn't need to test anyone. He doesn't need to manufacture jealousy. He doesn't need to hint at other women. His life speaks for him. His time is full. His attention is selective. His energy isn't chasing approval. That environment naturally filters people. Some rise to it, others drift away. Neither outcome requires force. Men are also taught that if a woman changes behavior when competition exists, that means her affection wasn't real. That interpretation misses the point. Affection doesn't disappear when options appear. It sharpens. It becomes intentional. It moves from passive enjoyment to active participation. That's not fake. That's awareness. Awareness makes people show up differently because the stakes feel real again. Think about how often you've seen behavior improve not after a conversation, but after a shift in availability. Less texting, more focus on your own life, clearer priorities. Suddenly things that were too hard aren't hard anymore. That's not manipulation, that's responsiveness. People respond to environments that require effort. When effort isn't required, it fades. This isn't gendered, it's human. What keeps men stuck is believing they need permission to live this way. They wait for validation from society, from friends, from podcasts, from comments. But permission isn't coming because leverage disrupts comfortable narratives. You don't need approval to stop over-investing. You don't need consensus to value yourself. You don't need agreement to live according to what you observe working in real life. This chapter isn't about encouraging men to juggle women or live recklessly. It's about freeing them from the idea that being singularly available is virtuous by default. Availability has value only when it's chosen, not assumed. When you choose availability from a position of abundance, it means something. When it's the only option, it's invisible. If this is challenging beliefs you've held tightly, let that discomfort sit. Don't rush to resolve it. Growth usually feels like losing something before it feels like gaining clarity. If this chapter helped you see how guilt keeps men from holding leverage, share it with someone who keeps apologizing for wanting respect. In the next chapter, we'll bring this full circle and talk about how to integrate leverage, commitment, and calm leadership without turning relationships into power struggles. Chapter 4. And this is where everything settles if you let it. Not with a dramatic conclusion, not with a rule etched in stone, but with a quieter understanding of how power, commitment, and calm leadership can coexist without turning your life into a chessboard. Because the goal was never to dominate anyone. The goal was to stop explaining yourself into irrelevance and start living in a way that naturally commands respect. When leverage is integrated correctly, it stops feeling like leverage at all. It feels like alignment. You're not scanning rooms to prove anything. You're not counting options to feel secure. You're simply aware that your life is full, your direction is clear, and your presence is valuable. That awareness changes how you speak, how you listen, and how you tolerate. Or more accurately, how little you tolerate. And that shift doesn't make you harsher. It makes you cleaner in your decisions. Commitment doesn't disappear in this framework. It actually becomes more meaningful. When you choose one woman while knowing you could choose others, the commitment carries weight. It's not obligation. It's intention. You're not staying because you're stuck. You're staying because it makes sense. That distinction matters more than people admit. It removes resentment before it can form. It removes the unspoken power struggle that comes from feeling trapped. Calm leadership grows out of that space. You don't need to assert authority when your life already reflects it. You don't need to correct every misstep with a lecture. You don't need to raise your voice or lower your standards dramatically. You set the tone through consistency, through what you engage with, through what you disengage from. People adjust to that tone or they remove themselves. Either outcome is information, not failure. This is where many men finally experience a different kind of peace. Not the peace of being left alone, but the peace of being met. Conversations feel easier because you're not trying to steer them. Effort feels mutual because it isn't coerced. Disagreements don't feel threatening because you're not afraid of losing leverage. You already know where you stand. That certainty is grounding in a way no amount of reassurance ever was. Relationships built in this space don't require constant maintenance. They require presence. When something's off, you notice it early because you're not distracted by fear or overinvestment. You address it calmly. If it resolves, great. If it doesn't, you don't spiral. You adjust. That adaptability is strength. It keeps small issues from becoming defining problems. It keeps respect intact even when things end. A lot of men worry that this approach will make them less emotionally available. In practice, it does the opposite. When you're not guarding against disrespect or chasing validation, you have more emotional capacity to give. You're not withholding. You're offering from abundance. That feels different on the receiving end. It feels steady. It feels safe. It feels real. And paradoxically, that safety often inspires more effort, not less. There's also a humility that comes with this clarity. You stop blaming women for dynamics you participated in. You stop framing yourself as a victim of manipulation. You recognize where you overinvested, where you ignored signs, where you tried to talk instead of observe. That accountability isn't self-criticism, it's ownership. Ownership restores agency. It reminds you that your life responds to your choices, not your complaints. Over time, this way of moving reshapes your entire social world. Not just romantic relationships. Friends respect your time more. Work relationships feel cleaner. People sense that you're not easily swayed or guilted. That doesn't make you rigid. It makes you reliable. Reliability is rare, and rare things attract attention without asking for it. If you zoom out and look at the arc of this entire video, the through line is simple even if the implications are uncomfortable. You don't get respected because you explain yourself well. You get respected because your life demonstrates value and optionality without chaos. You don't hold leverage by threatening to leave. You hold it by being prepared to live well, regardless of who stays. That preparedness changes everything quietly. This isn't about winning against anyone. It's about not losing yourself while trying to keep someone else comfortable. It's about refusing to trade self-respect for temporary harmony. It's about understanding that calm leadership isn't loud, and power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to be real. You carry this forward. Don't turn it into a script. Don't turn it into a performance. Let it settle into how you live. Pay attention to where effort flows easily and where it doesn't. Trust patterns more than promises. Trust your nervous system when things feel off. And remember that the strongest position you can ever be in is one where you don't need to convince anyone of your value because your life already does that work for you. If this series of chapters helped you see why words alone don't change dynamics, why options stabilize behavior, and why calm beats control every time, take a moment and like the video. Share it with someone who keeps trying to talk their way into being valued, and then move forward quietly, with fewer explanations, clearer choices, and a life that doesn't require permission to be respected.